All right, so I think for most of our meeting today, Andrew and Ryan have prepared a little presentation about what goes on out here in the factory. So I'm in the factory still, again, and Kevin and Steve and Sarah and Jeff will be joining us here. And Ryan and Andrew, for those of you who didn't know, came out and did a little tour out here. They're doing shop drawings, and they put together a little presentation about what goes on out here. You know, I know we have a lot of new people who don't really know much about the factory, and a lot of people who have been around for a while who don't know about the factory. And even if they know about the factory, probably don't know specifically about how we're doing shop drawings now. So I thought it would be good to get everybody up to speed and a little, you know, somewhat on the same page. And I know at our design call after this one, Carl's going to be talking about everything under the sun as it relates to design, and I know that there's a possibility that people in design are going to be helping out with shop drawings, you know, similar to the way that Andrew and Ryan did. So yeah, I'm just going to pass it over to them now. They're going to do their presentation. I'm not sure exactly how long that's going to take, but if you have questions as we go, ask them, and then we can do our normal Revit question and answer stuff at the end if there's time for it. And then, of course, we have the design call, so we'll just jump over to that after we're done. So go ahead, Andrew and/or Ryan, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I mean, I think the intention is to maybe do this presentation as a full design call as well, but for the next one, Carl has a lot of issues to go over today, so I think we threw this together rather quickly, but I think it's important issues that we should be hearing about sooner rather than later. For some, it's a kind of introduction to the factory in general, and then you know, we're trying to relay some information that Ryan and I were learning in the shop in general. So this is what the factory looks like from the outside, and on the right is obviously the kind of line. Here is Zone 1, where they're fabricating steel. In the distance, you can see Zone 2. Mouse isn't working. There we go. So here is Zone 2 as well. Zone 1 is all steel. Zone 2 is where they're actually putting in the walls and all the systems. Zone 3 is where they're doing finish work. And is there Zone 4? No. Here is the Humdegger, which is actually programmed to cut all of our studs to length. We'll get into that in a minute, what the shop drawings kind of look like in terms of how they kind of input that information. For some of you that might not know, we used to be using a Newcon system, which is a steel stud system. Basically, that machine was incredibly finicky. While interesting and maybe high-tech, and some clients are really excited about it, it was really difficult to work with in terms of its programming, and then we were adding lots of wood to it anyway afterwards, so it wasn't really creating the efficiencies that we would have liked for it. So now this is the kind of machine that is helping us with efficiency in the factory. Just showing some of the steel details. This is a breeze space, which is a mod C for the breeze house. You can see on the upper right the hinges that are actually bolted in place to allow this panel to fold down. And then you can see this hinge here at the line of the floor, where the floor would fold up and fold towards the center of the breeze space. These are our floor inlay panels. As you can see, there's actually a rim joist that our joists frame into that's set inside the steel. You know, in some ways, you might ask why we don't just hang off of the steel. Part of that is they want to be able to build these off on tables. So they're not building them in place. They're actually using the factory for what it's kind of good for, and then in theory able to hoist these into place with, you know, simple gantries. Right now, they're doing it with manpower, which is creating all sorts of problems that we'll kind of get into later. But you can see the kind of holes that we're creating for plumbing and electrical zones, as well as these holes, these notches that allow the radiant to run from one bay of the floor joist to the next.
And those are all program cuts into the Hundegger also, so those are spit out by that machine that you saw earlier, so that those are all just ready to go and be assembled on the table.
And by the way, if we're going fast or if something's unclear, if you want to see an image again, just stop us. So some images of some mods on the floor. Andrew Bodley is not here. He took these photographs, so I'm not exactly sure what projects these are. But I was really trying to illustrate here both what kind of happens before the sheathing goes on, but then afterwards, after we have the weather barrier and we actually put our strapping pieces that execute our rain screen detail before we put on the siding. So just what kind of all that looks like before the siding goes on. A zoomed-in detail of our window trim, which I think Andrew had sent this detail to a few of us, but just kind of illustrating how how these are ripped in the shop to allow for siding to butt up behind it, and again how the strapping works with that. That are these strips of OSB. These over here are these kind of numbered tips panels. So those get sent to factories so that they can be installed and we can make sure that everything fits. But then they're actually flat packed separately. So the mod itself folds up, but then all the interior walls, tips, some appliances, some other things are actually taken out so they can fold it up, and those extra things are flat packed to site. Two images, one kind of just showing more detailed finish work of how the Anderson patio doors look on site. These are outswings, and what the kind of breeze space actually looks like without the kind of clerestory piece. I think I have an image that shows the clerestory piece as well, but that this kind of furred down ceiling allows for our light trough and a few other things, and in some houses we'll have a fireplace that surrounds this steel. Wanted to show how we deal with the hinges kind of once the house is complete. Two different ways. Some are actually bolted on and then removed once we get to site. So this is a side wall of a mod. So I believe this panel over here is a fixed panel, and these two panels unfold and create the kind of living space generally. And these hinges are then removed so that the drywall can be put in place afterwards, that kind of last strip. In the floor, they're much smaller in terms of how much they stick out from the steel. So they actually work and are kind of just hidden. They come pretty much flush with the subfloor, so the finished floor just goes straight over top of this. And I'm sure some of you have wondered how some of the island plumbing works. This is a subwall for a kitchen island with the outlets on the side as well, and these outlets for a disposal or a dishwasher. So this will be a kind of key image as we get into some of the other issues, or some of the shop drawing issues. So this is a 2x4 wall that has a high register. I'm not sure if this is a supply or return, but as you can see, it pretty much takes up the entire bay. And if you're trying to mount anything or have a light switch below a register, kind of impossible. And what we were noticing, and we'll try and show the Nicholas model, was that there was a lot of discrepancies that we can probably clean up on our side of knowing that, if I have a register above, basically I can't have anything below it, and or we need to be kind of cognizant of all of our keep away elements, which is a kind of another issue that we probably won't talk about, but that we need to be kind of cognizant of. We can't have our keep away elements kind of colliding with each other, and I think in some cases that is happening. Part of that is because our bathrooms are really small, but it's something to be aware of. I wanted to show this image to show kind of what's happening in some of our bathrooms behind the finishes. So on the left here, we see the plumbing for the shower and the kind of shower head, the control, blocking for, I think, future grab bars. On the other side is blocking likely for cabinetry. And I think this is a big one that I've seen some discrepancies with in some models. This is our in-wall tank for our toilet. And this keep-away element is built into the family. If we're doing an in-wall, for most products, that means that we have to switch out the window. Generally, we're allowed to, or the window that we kind of spec comes down a little bit further. I don't know if it's all the way to here or if it's a little bit higher up. But the windows that we typically spec above toilets in a lot of the products won't work. So you need to be cognizant of what the keep-away element is and how far you need to kind of stay away from that. Just more kind of in-the-wall stuff. This is actually what our manifold looks like in a kind of access hatch. I wasn't exactly sure with this. Luke, do you have an idea of what this guy is? Is this the HRV? Or anyone is the CHRV?
It looks like a washer dryer thing. Maybe not a dumpster.
Oh, a booster fan or something?
Or, we have the drain that goes from a toilet, not from a toilet, from a washer dryer. You have the supply and the shutoffs, and then you have the
But the gray box is
Gray box, washer dryer, so the fire.
okay. 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 So yeah, I don't know if everyone was hearing that, but
by the way.
sorry, what did you say, Jeff?
Why are you kicking me?
I don't know. All right. Well, anyway, more stuff that goes in our walls. Obviously, as we were saying, this is for kind of laundry stuff. And just, again, things that we kind of need to be aware of. In terms of our electrical panel, as you can see in this kind of stud bay, it's basically completely full up. This blocking piece is actually to kind of stabilize these tubes that come down from it. But say if you're trying to put a register below an electrical panel, obviously you can't do that, or say an outlet or anything like that. I think there's some wiggle room because of that blocking piece to have something that might need to be blocked on the other side. But in general, I think we should be kind of keeping away from below the electrical panel, and then obviously above it as well with kind of all the wires that need to come out of it. I wanted to show these two images just as a kind of note on what some of the finishes look like, but also maybe as a question for Carolyn in terms of the cabinetry. I think right now we're speccing an inch of overhang from the box. 3/4 of an inch from the box. Okay, so what Carolyn's saying is that right now we're kind of speccing 3/4
inch from the face of the cabinet, face of the drawer.
Correct. And so I guess what I'm questioning is, A, this obviously looks like it's 3/4 from face of the drawer. And I don't know if this is an outdated detail or if we're not relaying the information or what's going on, but it was something that, Andrew took the photo and I just wanted to bring up as maybe a talking point or a question. I think, all of the updated cabinet drawings and procurement drawings that Carolyn. Sorry, Jeff, what do you got?
It's supposed to be 3/4 inches off the face of the drawers or the doors or whatever you want to say, not from the cabinet frame itself. So that is the right detail. At least from here, it looks like it.
That would make sense, but I've been told by people who read my drawings that it's 3/4 of an inch from the box.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there's some discrepancy there. Carolyn was kind of working with the cabinet manufacturer on these drawings, and I think what she's saying is she was getting red lines that were saying 3/4 of an inch from the box. I think we were all in agreement that 3/4 of an inch from the face of the drawer or door makes more sense in terms of what it's going to look like in terms of finish and giving some tolerance. So Jeff, is that something that we need to change with our procurement drawing kind of template?
We used to always, before we started doing the automatic schedules, when we did the schedule for the countertops, there was always a note in there somewhere that said, countertop the overhang face of drawers or face of doors 3/4 of an inch. It may be disappearing now, but that's how we used to take care of how we wanted it to be done.
Well, so I'm not sure if you've seen these drawings, but Carolyn had worked both with our cabinet manufacturer and a number of people within the company to develop standards for what our procurement drawings for hardwood would be. And basically those drawings are kind of a little more detailed than, say, what our old interior elevations were. Those notes that you're referring to that are general notes that have such things like 3/4 of an inch overhang, but I know that right now says 3/4 of an inch from the face of the cabinet box and not from the drawer or the door. So that's something that we need to change then.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. That's why I wanted to show this photograph, just to make sure.
So is the cabinet guy actually producing the countertops? I thought that got taken care of in the shop. Somebody came out and measured them and then went running off and did their thing.
I think they do.
So I don't know why Hotwood is marking up the countertops.
They just mark the casework. It's a factory issue.
So do we have a document to provide to the people who do the case or the countertop templating? How do they know what that's supposed to be?
I would assume that since those notes are on the casework drawing, we give them the same drawing, and that they do their templating on site at the factory.
Okay, so it's sort of dual purpose. It's for hardwood and for the casework or for the countertop.
I think that makes sense, but I think my answer is we're not sure over here anyway.
I've never sent a drawing to the factory.
So I don't know if that's worth. That's something that we need to look into, but I think either way, I mean, we're sending something to the countertop guy, right?
Yeah.
So I would assume that
we
we
away from that. Yeah, away from that. I think we can template here.
Okay. Well, let's maybe hold on to that one and keep going. So again, kind of seeing more finishes. Probably most people haven't necessarily seen what some of our bathrooms are kind of looking like. Obviously, this is in process. But this is situations where we have a kind of shower tub combination. This on the right is actually the in-floor drain that we have for the walk-in shower. You can barely see it, but this floor actually does slope down. And that's something in the shop drawing that's specified that they kind of change how the framing is working so that those pieces run in the opposite direction. Typically our joists are running in this direction. They turn it for that bay to run in this direction and taper them down to accept that drain and accept the tile so that everything can slope towards that. I know that this detail in at least the balance becomes an issue in terms of white and steel. That's be aware of. And then I just wanted to show these two things. Probably a lot of people haven't necessarily seen what a pocket door kind of really looks like, that this is in a 2x6 wall. We actually have a kit for it that is a pre-manufactured kit. But that typically, if you're doing a one, if you're doing a one pocket, it's in a, if you're doing a two panel pocket that's going into the same pocket, that's a 2x8. Ryan has a project that they're trying to do 3 pockets or 3 doors in the same 3 panels into the same pocket. So in theory, that would be a 2x10 wall. I don't expect to have many of those But anyway, just to kind of note that really what they're doing is kind of turning, if you're not doing it with a kit, they're actually turning the framing on end. So you have 1.5 inches on either side, and then a 2.5-inch cavity to accept the panel itself. If we're looking, I know this has been a kind of question. It was a question I had at a couple of moments. It seems like the detail that we're doing at the transition between tile and floor is that the tile basically stops at the inside of the bathroom. The wood floor continues, and the kind of threshold, I don't know if that's an inch, it looks about an inch, is between those two materials. So I think in terms of how we're modeling it, that the wood floor should go up to the tile floor, as opposed to, say, splitting in the middle, or I think in some cases just leaving it blank. I think it's a minimal amount, but I think it's something that would add to our count, obviously. We can.
Is that always going to be the standard here?
Under the door like we're supposed to.
I thought it was going to be on the inside.
Strip of tile.
Luke, do you know if interior doors are always, when they swing in, they're always going to be on the in-swing side of the jamb? Or is that a standard detail, or is that, or can we trust to always model the floor in that way?
I do not know the answer to that.
The door is always on the inside because that's how the hinges work. Either that or you wouldn't be able to open the door all the way up. All right. So, and then we can model it any way you want it to be modeled on the floor. We just, I suppose, we need a detail for it.
What would happen if you had a tile to wood floor transition underneath a pocket door, which is obviously in the middle of the wall?
Over the middle of it. That's how I'm seeing it on the floor.
Yeah.
Where in the pocket door.
Put it in the middle of the pocket door.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah.
I think ideally it should always be underneath the door so that the door hides the transition, because you don't want to be able to see a little strip of wood or a little strip of tile with the door closed.
Right. Which, and I mean, you know, back to Ross's question for a second, I think, you know, obviously, you know, as Jeff's comment is well made, that the hinges are on the inside, so the door is going to be justified to the inside. That's not necessarily how our families are built, and I'm not saying that in terms of that we should change that. That's just something to recognize, so that if you were basing your floor directly off of the swing door, it wouldn't necessarily be an accurate assumption.
Door jambs are built for the base of the door is flush with the drywall on the side.
Right.
So that jamming out will be towards that side, regardless of the wall. It just that does
Right.
well.
Usually 5 feet.
So yeah, so then, you know, this obviously, so this is a screenshot from K-Pour, the floor inlay panel. This is the B mod of the breeze house, and this is a stair down to a site-built lower level. We wanted to show this image because I think what it's starting, and this is more of a, you know, a shop drawing question, but I think it's something that we can potentially be helping with. That more or less the inlay panels are running on a 16-inch on-center grid, and that's not to say that it starts in one panel, then ends, and then it starts again in another panel, but that actually goes from the outside of the HSF, hollow steel section, and runs to the other side of the house. So it's one continuous kind of layout, and that becomes important because the spine wall, which, sorry, let me get to a spine wall. So this is actually the A mod, so just kind of rotate it. The spine wall, which runs underneath the beam above and defines our bathrooms generally, a lot of times this will have registers in it, and this should wind up kind of working with that grid, because basically what's been happening is we've kind of just been placing registers kind of where they make sense and saying, okay, well, the shop will figure it out. And kind of what's been happening is they're placing studs based off of where the registers are, and not necessarily kind of coordinating with the floor joists, or in the shop they're not doing that. So what's happening is a duct might actually be running directly into a joist, and then they kind of have to fix it later.
Hey, Andrew, that's for both exterior walls and spine walls, right? Not just the spine walls?
Yes, but the thing with the exterior walls is we're not running any ducts into exterior walls. So while it's probably important to kind of be cognizant of that grid, on the exterior walls, it's not really something that that is affected there. It's more in the spine wall and the ceiling panels. I would say the drop ceiling panels.
Where it doesn't come into effect with the exterior walls is where like the intake and exhaust vents come out.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing you have to worry about in terms of dealing with the grid and the exterior walls. You don't want to be placing intake or exhaust vent right on a grid line.
Well, and I mean, just to get back to Luke's question, so say at this exterior wall, it's almost kind of irrelevant what the Mooney grid is doing, because there's steel bullfoot all the way around. So it's not like we could run something from the floor up into that wall. If there's a furred out wall in front of that for plumbing or otherwise, that's a different story. But so that's kind of how we're seeing the Moonies working out.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey.
I was talking. It's Steve. I was talking with Rod this week, and he basically said, unless there's really a reason not to do it, we'll try and keep the exterior Mooney walls on that grid too. And he said even if there's not a duct going through it, there are situations where there might be part of the framing concealed and part exposed, and it's a lot easier for the carpenters in the factory to use what studs are visible as a reference point and then measure over, so it makes the overall coordination a lot easier, even if maybe there's not necessarily like a duct that has to line up through there. So it's kind of one of those things, like there's a little, I guess it's more like there's a little more flexibility in the stud spacing with the Mooney wall, but like if there's nothing objecting to it, just align it to the rest of the grid.
Sure, and I guess I think that's a really good point, Steve. And I guess, sorry, I was saying more in terms of how design is kind of thinking about it, that I don't think we need to be concerned necessarily with the framing of the Mooney walls, except for, say, the corner details, or rather details at steel. But we can be cognizant of those ducts coming up in the spine wall, or plumbing or whatever coming up in the spine wall, and trying to keep that on the 16-inch grid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Hey, this is Gavette in Waltham. To respond to Steve's comment, I totally agree with that. When design was working on shop drawings, that's how we framed the building. Everything was 16 inches on center. The exterior walls lined up with the floor, and spine walls lined up, and any sort of plumbing walls that would be butted up against the exterior wall also lined up, so that the interior plumbing wall could be fastened to the exterior wall. And I think that we'd always thought that when we passed on the shop drawings to the factory, that there was some understanding that 16 inches on center would still be still applied, but I guess that's not what's happening. I think we need to maybe communicate to the factory that since we're doing our models in Revit now and we're not modeling the studs, it's really hard for the designers to just always be cognizant of where the studs are falling. So for example, if I put in a wall register, when I put it in, I'm not going to have time, especially with the way that we have the Revit model set up now, and the continuous wall is just this homogeneous entity. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to take time or have the time to put the register at where I know a stud would fall. When back in the day, if I was working on shop drawings and I was the one who was responsible for placing that register in a drawing, I would definitely do that because I'm drawing the studs. I think the factory
because then we can add the grid as an overlay inside of the Revit model, so you can know where all the studs are going to lay out if we're using a standard grid.
Yeah. Is that what we plan on doing? I think
that is the plan, and I guess I think that's really well said, Yvette. I guess just two notes on that. One is that again, I think the only I'm not saying that the shop drawings aren't doing the 16-inch grid, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying in terms of what we are doing in our Revit models. The main thing to be cognizant of is that spine wall, or really any wall that is perpendicular to the floor joists. And I say that in terms of, Carl and Ryan and myself and Steve were having some of these conversations that the kind of rest of the walls, we can place things where we want, and it's up to, and these are ongoing conversations, but that it's up to the shop team that's working at the factory to move studs around as necessary and kind of take our model as gospel.
Well, but I also think that
I think as long as the factory understands, I think as long as the factory understands that we have a 16-inch on-center grid, and that basically, any window openings, any vent openings, just either need to be slightly adjusted if possible, so we can maintain that 16-inch on-center grid, or if not, the grid basically takes the location of the vendor window will override the grid. That's kind of how we had been operating on the design team.
And I think from Carl's perspective, it's mostly the latter. That I think what's been happening in some of the houses that are built is that they were operating under the former assumption, and that things were getting slightly adjusted, and then because of that, things weren't necessarily aligning. And I'm not saying that in terms of the shop drawings were not accurate. I think it's more that they were taking leeway with it in the factory and moving things around, whether that was a register supposed to be aligning to the center line of a window, and they were moving it to a joist or a stud, then it wasn't aligning with what it was supposed to align with. And so from Carl's perspective, what he was saying was that we can't be that, adhering to the grid that no one ever sees kind of in some ways creates poor design. So I think it's more supposed to be the latter, that if we put something somewhere for a specified reason, which most things we do, that it's up to the shop team to adjust their studs accordingly. So again,
Andrew, I think there are things that you need to have. You have an intention of you want to align the center line of the window with the center line of a register, and I think that makes sense. But I think there's also, I think that's the minority of cases. I think the majority of cases, you don't really care if it moves over 3 inches, so a switch or an outlet can align with the stud. And so
exactly.
I think
if
we're aware of the grid and we can move to the grid in the cases where it doesn't matter, it makes it easier for the shop. But then they will also know, oh, this one actually has to be exactly where, well, everything should be where it's placed in the model, and then it just gives the designer more understanding of how it's going to be built and which one is aligning to the grid and which one is not.
Yeah, and having work with the guys who are doing like MEP drawings here too, when we're placing outlets in a model, sometimes they're very important. Like I had a project where like it was down to the inches where they wanted a switch next to like a bed. And then I've had other times where it's like, okay, I'm just dropping in the outlet so I can get the 12-foot on center spacing, right? Now, the only thing is it's hard for sometimes the engineers who are doing shop drawings to know which is the case. Like if that's a very specific location or if it's just something they can move over a little bit. So I think one of the things is by having that grid in the model and trying to use that as our baseline to avoid situations where they need to guess or find out if it's, they wouldn't guess, but if they need to avoid the situation where they have to find out, well, do I move this, do I move the stud? If we kind of design with that grid in the background and just try to avoid it to begin with, it makes that whole process a lot smoother and fewer complications.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and I think that's probably the best practice. I guess in that case, if we're moving something off of the grid, is then their assumption supposed to be that it's moved off the grid for a specific reason?
Yes.
Okay.
Who communicates that assumption?
I think that is the assumption, and it doesn't need to be communicated, right? Like they up until this point have thought that if it's placed somewhere in the model, that's where it's supposed to be placed, and they've taken liberties or not known whether they could take liberties. And I think having the grid and having the designer know the grid, anytime there's a deviation from the grid, it's assumed to be intentional. Whereas now, they just assume the designer doesn't know what they're doing, so they take more liberties.
I think we need to communicate that somehow to, like, whoever runs the shop department, whenever that happens.
Little kickoff meeting when you hand them the model and everybody can ask you questions like, hey, can I move some of the electrical outlets? And you say, yeah, but don't touch the ones in the master bedroom because that whoever's a wacko in there, it's going to be exactly where they are.
That's, I think, what needs to happen.
All the time when we would send a project to the factory, and it was always a kickoff meeting.
Yep.
We would point out trouble, problem areas or look out for this. That should never
Well,
go.
I don't think this would be project specific necessarily. It would just be like from now on, because we're using the grid, we're going to be aware of this. And whenever I place something off the grid, please be aware that it's for a reason.
Well, I still think the kickoff meetings is a good idea, though.
Oh, yeah.
Even if
I mean,
it's like an
not
hour.
a novel thing either.
There's custom spec stuff, too, because you know how much that's happening now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
grid overlay
kickoff
is
meeting is
yeah.
definitely something that's sorely missing because I know, again, like Steve, Ryan and I, having been out there for 2 weeks working on these drawings with the MEP guys, again, they just assume they can't move anything. And they're even like kind of afraid to call us as project designers because if, A, it bogs them down, or B, they don't know us, or they don't know what's going on with the project or anything like that. So yeah, I think one of the big takeaways, unfortunately, was that there's not a whole lot of process right now at the factory in terms of drawings or in terms of what's going on at the floor. And these are the things that, both Woody coming in and I think whoever takes over for Albert, those are the things that kind of need to happen as soon as possible in terms of what those processes are and what those kickoff meetings are like. Because I know there's a kind of supreme lack of communication between us and the shop team and the shop team and the floor at the moment. So, I mean, not to be a kind of damper moment, but that's just the reality of what's going on right now.
There's also just an extreme lack of defining scope of work between design and engineering, like what falls on our plate and then like what we kick over to them. Because that's where things are getting.
It was clear.
You can't just say
3 months ago.
As design, we're going to disregard the 16-month center grid and our models, kick it over to them, and then like,
But I think
what do they do?
But I think there should be. I was talking with Rod, who's sort of interim filling in charge of the shop department until the new engineering manager comes in. And one of the major failings, I think, company-wide that we've had is we haven't had communication upstream. You just get dumped on you, whatever is coming from upstream, but your input is never sort of kicked back. And I think, especially with designers being out at the factory right now and doing shop drawings, I think we have a really good opportunity to gain some of the information, some of the design rules is a term that's being thrown around of, restrictions of, or not necessarily restrictions, but having designers know what's going to be done with their model once they send it to the factory for production.
Yeah, and actually, it is, I think, a communication issue because the last time Sarah just spoke up here, she said, we were doing more, but then we were told to disregard the 16-inch on center grid. me, because I just started 3 months ago, Sarah's been here for 2 years plus, I didn't even know that there was ever or has ever been a 16-inch on-center grid. I mean, like I know the walls are 16 on center, but I didn't know everything was aligned at any point. So I think with so many new designers and changing staff, yep, with so many new people there, we've got to figure out, you know, like what knowledge do people know that isn't getting shared, and what things do people know that you know, that need to be communicated more effectively.
I just think we're putting in a certain level of very like specificity into our models, and it's our responsibility to be aware of how they're built as houses. I don't know. I mean, it's like one thing to be like, well, it's the engineering team responsibility. They'll figure it out. They'll move the window, but then do the register. You know, it's just like,
well,
you have to take some
there's responsibility and accountability, but also scopes of work. And to Gavette's point, so the more that we need to be aware of, it's just going to take more time and more effort. And I don't know how to sort of balance the two, but whenever I hear about adding more things and being more like aware of what's, you know, in the model, the more I feel like it's just the scope of work of design is just exploding all the time.
I guess I wasn't looking at it as like making their lives easier, but as a design
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, well, I'm trying to convey this to the builder, and this is how I want it. I know that this is the 16-inch grid. This is how I need to have it designed. And
I feel like that's why we have to have a communication with the factory about what is critical and what's not. Because right now, because we haven't had this conversation, or maybe we have, but we haven't had it in an extensive way. I have asked Daniel directly in the factory, how detailed do I need to be in this model? And he says it has to be perfect. That doesn't communicate to me specifically what I need. And I think it's just because we haven't had this discussion and really pointed out what's critical and what's not. Because I think to jump on some of Luke and Kevin's comments earlier, we want to rely on the grid in some cases and not. And a lot of it is a judgment call. And I think that there's just been discrepancies in those judgment calls. Design would say it's important in one way, and maybe the factory just wouldn't see it. Like a receptacle in the kitchen we put in a particular spot should stay there, and if it's a receptacle along the wall, maybe it can move 1 inch to hit the stud. You know?
Well, and I mean, just to give you guys an idea of process right now, they're not touching anything in our Revit models. They're linking in our Revit models and basically drawing. Well, they were drawing over them. Now they're modeling. They're actually, so like all of these things are modeled. They're actually placing studs in the models, and so the reality is that they're not, and their kind of directive is they're not allowed to move anything. They're allowed to talk to us about moving stuff, or tell us that something doesn't work, but they're not allowed to actually move stuff. So I don't know if some of you have gotten calls over the last couple of weeks. We've been trying to help the shop team understand which project designers are working on which projects. But that's the reality. It's not that they're saying, oh, well, I can move this over if I want to. Right now, they're not doing that. So I think that gets to Sarah and Yvette, and I think a few other people's points, that we really need to be getting back to these factory kickoff meetings, so that it's like, yeah, actually, I don't really care where those registers go. I just kind of place them for now. They need to be high, and they need to be in this general area, but you can move it if you need to. And same thing with outlets, but this outlet needs to be here because it's lining up with this track that's up on the ceiling. You're right, they're not seeing that, but they're also not changing it without our approval.
I was getting the opposite impression, but you've been working on more shop drawings than me, so.
They're not touching the model. That's just whether they're making those adjustments in the field or not, or field factory or not. That's a different story, and I have my suspicions that they are. But the shop drawing team is not touching the model.
Do we have an understanding of what they're using as existing resources and what they're actually drawing from scratch again? Because when we were doing the shop drawings on the design team here, we had a stockpile of just standard shop drawings that we reused, for example, on the Breeze house. Same tapered insulation for the side mounts, every single project. Are they doing that?
I'm actually taking the Nicholas model, which is what Andrew is showing here, and I am helping them to create their Breeze House shop drawing template, which has all of the studs already modeled in it, and so they'll have to make project-specific customizations. But I think as of right now, they've sort of started a new shop drawing model for every project that they get through. But now that, if they get another Breeze House, they'll use the shop drawing template and only do modifications to it. But yeah, up until this point, it's been a one-off sort of thing, and they're, I think, a little bit lagged behind us in terms of developing standard things. But it's on their mind, and they're asking for help with it while we're out here. So hopefully they'll be able to get some efficiencies from those soon.
I see. So they're not using from previous projects, for example, the standard tapered insulation. No, but I mean like as a shop drawing.
They're not. Sorry,
I'm talking about like a tapered insulation drawing.
We're not there yet.
Yeah,
I just mean things like that from previous projects. That
things that are incredibly standard, yeah, they are using those. But say, the Moonies, those change from project to project, whether there's a typo connector, whether there's windows that get moved around, those kinds of things. So those have to shift. And the other thing is, 2 people were working on all of the shop drawings, from January until basically a couple of weeks ago. And, in some cases they were doing it in AutoCAD. Some cases they were drafting 2D elements in 3D views in Revit. They just started using 3D elements. They're trying to catch up. They're not there yet. They've also hired a lot of more people. So these kind of questions, I think that's part of why we're going out to do a lot of the help with that, to both get them through the work, but also to kind of set up their standards. So these questions aren't being asked on either, or it's not that these questions aren't being asked on either end. It's just that I think up until a couple of weeks ago, they weren't really able to do anything about them.
Yeah, and Andrew, the good news is Rod came in today and was talking with us, and he said, like, for the first time in forever, we actually have a couple extra drawings in the backlog ahead of, like, the factory schedule. It's not quite, we need a little more cushion, but I think the good news is we're getting to the point where we can start to establishing those standards and procedures for them. So, hopefully we can fix a lot of these, issues that arise from process and communication, because now we'll actually have time to do it.
Hey guys, I think we're having a really good conversation, but we've got about 7 minutes before we've got to jump over. So Andrew, if you want to hit any other high points that you have, or do a quick
Thanks, Luke. I was just about to say that, actually. So I guess just a couple of things. One, this kind of automatic schedule, Revit schedule that's being generated, Ben, who works in the shop, has been really helpful getting them kind of set up and is now using Luke as a resource, has a lot of these things set up. They're actually generating this based off of these 3D elements that are in the model, not too dissimilar from our automatic schedules, and then actually programming this into the Hundigger to actually cut. And if it's a floor inlay panel, as Ryan was saying before, they cut those holes and notches as necessary. This is a kind of typical cage. This is a spine wall, so this is a 2x6 wall with a door, I believe, into one of the bathrooms. They call out, they tag each individual element so that the guy on the floor knows what goes to what. They kind of start at base point and run left to right and bottom to top. And so, again, in theory, they're using mostly the kind of 16 on center. Obviously, here there's some differences there, but really that's kind of what they're trying to do. And as this drawing shows, then they get this kind of layout plan that tells them where all the drawings go. This kind of arrow icon, which is a little tough to see at the moment. You can see it maybe better here. Tells you where to kind of start the wall, where to end it. But I think, so showing some of these pieces, or showing some of these wall panels, I think illustrates the point of, some walls we have a lot of, I guess I didn't put the one in that I wanted to. Kevin would probably know the one that I'm talking about that basically has, I think it had like 30 different pieces of blocking for one of the bathroom plumbed walls because of the cabinets, because of all the shower elements. There's a lot that's going into our walls, especially in the bathrooms, and I think that just gets back to the point of we really need to be cognizant of, say, again, if we have a register, that basically nothing can go below it unless it's a 2x6 wall, and then it can go on the opposite side of the register, the opposite side of the wall, or it needs to be moved kind of to the side if it's a 2x4 wall. Additionally, I know in this house, in Nicholas, there was a wall-hung toilet here, and in this bathroom, there was blocking for a towel rod that was needed, and those things conflicted. Same thing over here, that there was two different towel rods here, and registers above, one that was a return from the bedroom and one that was a supply from the bathroom, and all of those things kind of conflict, and I think those are things that we on design really need to be aware of. And I guess that's probably all the time maybe we have, but I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts.
Hey, Andrew. If we
Kevin.
do have a duct and like a towel rod or an outlet or switch or something in the same wall, one facing the other way or one facing another way, is it possible to get both of them in the same wall if it's a 2x6?
Yes. So the duct that we typically spec is a 3¼ inch duct. So in a 2x6 wall, yes, as long as the register is facing one way and the towel rod or whatever is facing the other way, that is possible.
Couldn't you theoretically just pull the duct over a little bit farther?
They have to be in separate phases.
Well, I mean, it comes out of the register, right? And it either goes straight down, or couldn't it theoretically go over a little bit and then turn down?
So what Ryan's saying is that if they're actually facing the same way, that as long as the duct is justified behind the blocking and the register is able to come from the top and just has a longer kind of turn piece, that's possible too. And yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that makes sense.
I only bring this up because our bathrooms are really tiny, and people want their towel bars, and we're going to have to get a return, or not a return, but a supply in there somehow. So, it might be a good, I don't know if you want to call it standard practice, but solution for when someone wants a towel bar and you have to fit a duct in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, just change it to a 2x6 wall.
Yeah, and it's something I thought about with Nicholas, that in this bathroom, I'm sorry, it might not be this bathroom, it might be the other one in Mod B, but ostensibly this wall in that other bathroom, for whatever reason, I assume it was certain clearances that we needed in the bathroom, was changed to a 2x4 wall, and that was the kind of issue. So yeah, I think, Kevin, the point is well taken, that if we're trying to fit a bunch of different stuff in one wall, that by default going to 2x6 makes a whole lot of sense.
I don't know that will always work in every scenario, because that means that whole wall will probably have to become a 2x6 wall.
What about the flat blocking we used to use?
This is a 2x4 wall. Sorry. Sorry, Jeff. What did you say?
We used to use this, supposedly use this coil stock metal for the corner walls.
Yes.
Put blocking on.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we use that?
My understanding is basically the Newcon machine is being put offline as soon as we're no longer selling I think the only reason it's even still operational is that some clients have very specifically stated that they want Newcon walls no matter what, and that's how they were sold the house, and that's what we have to do, which sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And so I guess to answer your question is the factory will likely balk at using anything that has to do with the Newcon as a kind of detail or workaround.
It's just flat metal stock. They can do whatever they want with it.
I mean, you just have to talk to the factory about how they detail that.
I mean, hey, Jeff, you're out there. I'm not.
No, they used to say they used it all the time, but every time I had a problem, they'd call me up and they'd send me a picture, and there was always wood blocking in the walls. So, you know, even though they were supposed to be using it a long time ago, they never used it. So I'm just curious.
Again, Jeff, I mean, it's a worthwhile question to ask while you're out there. It's not something that I thought of while I was out there.
We can ask Rod.
He's been here how long?
In that case, though, Kevin, if you wanted to still use the 2x4 wall, not always go to a 2x6, those studs can shift. I mean, because that wall is running parallel with the floor framing. Those aren't as critical.
Okay, guys, I think we got to switch over to the design call.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for putting this together, guys. This is really great.
Thanks. I'll post it somewhere on the Astronauts.
Okay, and I'll put the video up on the Blue Home YouTube channel.
Thanks.